Marcus Johnson stepped into Thompson's pharmacy, the familiar chime of the doorbell announcing his arrival. The air inside was tinged with the scent of antiseptic and the faint sweetness of a nearby display of candy. It was a typical small-town pharmacy, bustling with the mundane rhythm of daily life. Marcus, a kind-hearted man in his 30s, felt a rush of excitement as he made his way to the counter. Today was particularly special. He was picking up a prescription for his mother, who had been unwell lately. "Good afternoon, Harold," he called out, a bright smile lighting up his face. Harold Thompson, the pharmacist, barely looked up from the computer screen. With a tight-lipped nod and an indifferent grunt, he acknowledged Marcus's presence. Harold was in his late 50s, with a bristling mustache that seemed to match his grumpy demeanor. His eyes, small and shifty, darted around the store, avoiding direct contact with Marcus. It was a stark contrast to the warmth Marcus usually received from the townspeople. "Just a moment," Harold muttered, his voice laced with impatience. He continued typing, completely dismissing Marcus's cheerful demeanor. If you're enjoying this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and activate the bell. That way, you won't miss any of our updates. Your support helps us bring you the best content possible. Continuing, Marcus's smile faltered for a brief moment, but he shook it off, reminding himself that everyone had their bad days. He leaned against the counter, scanning the shelves filled with colorful bottles and boxes. His gaze landed on a few children giggling as they chose snacks from the display, and his heart swelled with nostalgia. He remembered when he was a kid, running through these aisles with his friends, carefree and innocent. "Do you need something?" Harold snapped, finally glancing up. Marcus blinked, momentarily taken aback by the sudden hostility. "I'm just waiting for my mom's prescription. I think it should be ready soon." "Yeah, well, it's not," Harold replied tersely. "You can wait over there." Marcus took a step back, feeling the sting of Harold's words. "Okay, no problem." He turned away, trying to shake off the unpleasant interaction. As he waited, he observed the other customers milling about, some engrossed in their own conversations, while others simply perused the aisles. After a few moments, he noticed a woman exiting the store. She was in her 50s, with a kind face and a large handbag slung over her shoulder. Marcus recognized her as Mrs. Jenkins, a longtime resident of the town. He gave her a friendly wave, and she smiled back, her eyes twinkling with warmth. Just as she stepped out, Harold's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Hey, you!" Marcus turned, his heart sinking as Harold pointed an accusing finger in his direction. "I saw you lurking around her. Did you take her wallet?" The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the other customers turned to look at him, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. A wave of humiliation washed over him, making it hard to breathe. "What?" Marcus exclaimed, his voice shaking. "I didn't." "You heard me," Harold barked, his voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "I saw you. Don't think I didn't notice you eyeing her purse." "You're a thief." Gasps erupted from the onlookers, their eyes darting between Harold and Marcus. The tension in the pharmacy escalated, and Marcus felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. "I was just waiting for my mom's prescription," he protested, desperation creeping into his tone. "I didn't do anything." "Save it," Harold sneered, crossing his arms defiantly. "I'm calling the police." "What?" "No, please." Marcus felt panic clawing at him. "This is ridiculous. You can't just accuse me like that. I've lived in this town my whole life." But Harold's expression was unyielding. He picked up the phone, his hands shaking with what seemed to be a mix of anger and satisfaction. "Yeah, I need the police here. I've got a thief in my store." Marcus's heart raced as he glanced around, searching for a friendly face in the crowd. But all he saw were strangers, their eyes filled with suspicion, their whispers slicing through him like icy daggers. "Marcus, is this true?" a voice called out. It was Mrs. Jenkins, her brow furrowed with concern. "I swear, I didn't do anything," he cried out, his voice breaking. "I was just waiting." But Harold had already turned his back, continuing his conversation with the operator on the phone. The feeling of betrayal surged within Marcus. This wasn't just an accusation. It was a public execution of his character. "Get out of my pharmacy," Harold shouted, slamming the phone down. "Please, just let me explain." Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes as he stepped back, the embarrassment overwhelming him. "Leave now." As the door swung open, the cool air rushed in, but it did little to soothe the heat rising within him. An officer in uniform stepped inside, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Who called?" the officer asked, scanning the pharmacy. "That man." Harold pointed at Marcus, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and self-righteousness. "He tried to steal from a customer." The officer's eyes flicked to Marcus, then back to Harold, a hint of skepticism crossing his features. "Is that so?" Before Marcus could respond, Harold continued. "I've got witnesses. He was acting suspiciously. I don't want him in here anymore." The officer stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Sir, I need you to calm down. Let's hear from everyone involved before jumping to conclusions." But Marcus felt trapped, the walls of the pharmacy closing in on him. He searched the faces around him, hoping to find someone who believed him, someone who would stand up against the tide of accusation. But instead, he saw doubt and fear reflected in their eyes. "Please," Marcus pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do anything. You have to believe me." The officer regarded him with a mix of concern and caution. "Just hang tight, okay? We'll get to the bottom of this." As the officer turned back to Harold, Marcus felt a sense of hopelessness wash over him. Confusion and desperation tangled within him, leaving him feeling small and powerless. The whispers of the crowd grew louder, a cacophony of judgment that drowned out his thoughts. Why would he do this? Marcus thought, his mind racing. Why would Harold accuse me like this? With each passing moment, the weight of the situation pressed down harder, leaving him feeling vulnerable in a world that suddenly felt so hostile. As he was escorted outside, the whispers followed him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the small town he had called home for so long was turning its back on him. Is this really happening? He thought, bewildered. What do I do now? With his heart heavy and his spirit crushed, Marcus stepped into the sunlight, the door of Thompson's pharmacy closing behind him. The world outside felt different, darker, colder, and filled with uncertainty. He glanced back at the store, knowing that this moment would change everything. The news of Marcus Johnson's public humiliation spread like wildfire through the small town, igniting a wave of gossip that rippled through every corner of the community. Within hours, the incident outside Thompson's pharmacy had become the hot topic at the diner, the barbershop, and even the local church. People gathered to discuss the shocking accusation, but the conversations quickly turned into whispers tinged with judgment and fear. "Did you hear about that Marcus Johnson?" A middle-aged woman whispered to her friend over coffee at the diner, her voice barely above a hush. "They say he was trying to steal from that nice pharmacist. I always knew he wasn't trustworthy." Her friend nodded, eyes wide. "I can't believe Harold would accuse him of that. I thought Marcus was a good kid. But you know how it is. People like him, they always have something up their sleeve." Across town, Marcus sat alone on the edge of his bed, feeling the weight of isolation pressing down on him. The warm sun filtered through his window, but no amount of light could penetrate the darkness he felt inside. The phone had been silent for hours, and his heart sank with each passing minute. Friends he had known since childhood had begun to distance themselves, their messages disappearing from his phone as if they had never existed. The betrayal stung more than the accusation itself. Just then, there was a muffled knocking on his front door. Relief washed over him. It was Sarah, his childhood friend, who had always stood by him through thick and thin. She burst into the room, her face a mix of concern and determination. "Marcus," she exclaimed, her voice filled with urgency. "I heard what happened. This is insane. You shouldn't have to deal with this alone." Marcus looked up, gratitude mingling with despair in his eyes. "I don't know what to do, Sarah. It feels like the whole town has turned against me." I didn't do anything wrong. But no one seems to care. She stepped closer, her expression softening. You need to fight back. You can't let Harold's lies define you. We have to clear your name. Marcus shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Fight back? How? The police already took me in for questioning. I'm just a black man wrongfully accused. No one's going to believe me over Harold. Stop that, Sarah insisted, her voice rising slightly. You have to believe in your truth. There are people who will support you, I promise. We just need to find the evidence that shows you didn't do anything wrong. He looked into her eyes, searching for hope in the depths of her unwavering belief. What kind of evidence? The whole situation was a setup. Harold is just a racist bully who thinks he can get away with anything. Then we'll expose him, she replied fiercely. Let's start by gathering information. We can talk to people who were there. Someone must have seen something. With a deep breath, Marcus nodded. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. They spent the next hour brainstorming a plan to fight back against the injustice that had befallen him. Sarah's presence gave him a sense of purpose, igniting a flicker of hope that had long been extinguished. As they left his house, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the pavement. Marcus felt the weight of the stares from passers-by, whispers trailing behind him like ghosts. They walked through the town, each familiar face now a reminder of his isolation. But Sarah stayed close, her arm brushing against his for reassurance. Let's go to the diner first, she suggested. People are always talking there. Maybe someone saw what really happened. The diner was buzzing with the lunch crowd, and the scent of fried food filled the air. But as they entered, an awkward silence descended. Conversations stuttered to a halt, eyes darting to Marcus before quickly looking away. He felt the heat of shame creep up his neck, but Sarah's unwavering support kept him grounded. They approached a table where a few of their old friends sat. The atmosphere was tense, and the air thick with unspoken words. Sarah cleared her throat, her voice breaking through the stillness. Hey guys, we're just trying to figure out what happened at the pharmacy. Did anyone see the whole thing? Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach as the group exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one of them, Jason, spoke up hesitantly. I heard about it, man. It's messed up, but you know how people talk. I didn't see anything myself. Another friend chimed in, yeah, it's tough, Marcus. Everyone's scared to get involved. Harold's a respected guy. No one wants to get on his bad side. Scared, Sarah interjected, her frustration bubbling to the surface. You're scared of standing up for a friend? He's being accused of something he didn't do. You all know Marcus. This isn't who he is. Silence reigned once more, and Marcus felt the weight of their indifference pressing down on him. I get it, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. You don't want to get involved. But if you were in my shoes, wouldn't you want someone to speak up for you? The table fell silent again, and Marcus's heart sank. He turned to leave, his shoulders slumped in defeat, but Sarah grabbed his hand. We'll find someone who will help us, she whispered fiercely. As they stepped back into the street, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, yet it felt like a cruel contrast to the darkness that had enveloped Marcus's life. Let's go to the police station, Sarah suggested. Maybe Officer Daniels can help. He's always been fair, right? If anyone can listen to your side of the story, it's him. Marcus hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at him. What if they think I'm just causing trouble? What if they don't believe me either? They will, Sarah assured him. You just have to be honest. You have to tell your side of the story. With a reluctant nod, Marcus followed her. The police station loomed ahead, a stark reminder of the authority that had turned against him. As they approached, dread pooled in his stomach. Once inside, the sterile atmosphere was overwhelming. The walls seemed to close in on him as they walked toward the front desk. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. Excuse me, we'd like to speak to Officer Daniels. Moments later, Officer Daniels emerged from the back, his demeanor calm and professional. Marcus, Sarah, he greeted them with a nod. What brings you here? "Officer, I need to talk to you about what happened at the pharmacy," Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly. "I was accused of stealing, and it's not true. I need help clearing my name." Officer Daniels's expression softened as he listened intently. "Come into my office. We can talk more privately." As they entered the office, Marcus felt a mix of hope and fear. Would Officer Daniels believe him? Would he be able to help him navigate the mess that had become his life? "Tell me everything," Daniels said. Leaning forward, his eyes focused on Marcus. Marcus took a deep breath, pouring out his side of the story, recounting the humiliation, the accusations, and the betrayal he felt from his own community. Sarah stood by him, her presence a comforting anchor. Daniels listened without interruption, his expression serious. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Marcus. We'll do everything we can to investigate the incident. You deserve to have your voice heard." As they left the station, Marcus's heart was heavy, but a glimmer of hope began to take root. Perhaps he wouldn't have to fight this battle alone. With Sarah's support and Officer Daniels's willingness to listen, maybe justice could prevail after all. Inside the dimly lit police station, the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. Marcus Johnson sat on a hard plastic chair, his hands clasped tightly together, his heart racing. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting shadows across the stark, white walls. He had never imagined that a simple trip to pick up his mother's prescription would spiral into this nightmare. He felt like a ghost, invisible yet painfully aware of the judgment surrounding him. The door creaked open and Officer Daniels stepped in. Unlike the officers Marcus had encountered earlier, Daniels exuded a calm authority. His uniform was crisp, and his demeanor was approachable. He was in his late 30s, with salt and pepper hair and a warm, inviting smile that contrasted sharply with the coldness of the station. As he approached Marcus, the young man felt a flicker of hope amidst the despair. "Marcus, right?" Officer Daniels asked, his voice steady and reassuring. "I'm Officer Daniels. I'm here to help you." "Help?" Marcus echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can you help me? Harold Thompson accused me of stealing, and now I'm sitting here like a criminal." "I understand," Daniels replied, taking a seat across from Marcus. "I want you to know that I'm going to take your side in this. We take accusations seriously, but I also know that people can be wrong. Let's talk about what happened." Marcus inhaled deeply, trying to steady his racing thoughts. "I was just there to pick up my mom's medication. I greeted Harold, but he was dismissive. Then, out of nowhere, he accused me of stealing a woman's wallet. I didn't even see her." Officer Daniels nodded, jotting down notes. "And you protested, correct?" "Of course. I told him I didn't do anything, but he called the police right away. Everyone was staring at me like I was a criminal," Marcus said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I felt so humiliated. Did anyone come to your defense?" Daniels asked, his gaze searching Marcus's face for any clues that might help understand the situation better. "No, no one did. They just watched," Marcus replied, his frustration boiling over. "It's like they all believed him without question. I'm just a black man in a small town. I guess that's all it took." Daniels leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. I want to make sure we get to the bottom of this. I'll review the incident report and look into the security footage from the pharmacy. That could be crucial." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. "There's footage?" he asked, hope igniting in his chest. "If Harold is lying, then that should prove it." "Exactly," Daniels said, a hint of a smile forming. "Let me see what I can do. In the meantime, I want you to stay strong. I'll keep you updated." As Officer Daniels stood up and left the room, Marcus felt a flicker of determination. Maybe there was a path forward after all. He had always been the kind of person who stood up for what was right, and he wasn't about to let this injustice define him. Meanwhile, at Thompson's pharmacy, Harold Thompson was basking in the glow of his self-proclaimed heroism. He leaned back in his chair, surrounded by a small group of friends at a local diner, recounting the day's events with exaggerated flair. He chuckled, taking a sip of his coffee, the steam rising in lazy curls as he spoke. "I caught that thief red-handed. You should have seen the look on his face when I accused him," Harold bragged, his voice dripping with pride. Everyone in the store turned to look at him. You could see the panic in his eyes. His friends laughed, egging him on. "You did the right thing, Harold. Someone had to keep an eye on those people," one of them said, a smirk on his face. "Yeah, it's about time someone stood up to them," another chimed in, a nod of approval evident in his expression. I mean, who knows what he was planning? Unbeknownst to Harold, the world outside the diner was shifting. Social media had erupted with outrage over the incident. Posts and comments circulated rapidly, condemning the pharmacist's actions and rallying support for Marcus. The hashtag Justice for Marcus had gone viral, with people sharing their own stories of prejudice and discrimination. In the diner, however, Harold remained blissfully ignorant. He continued to spin his tale, reveling in the attention and the false sense of superiority it provided. "I'm going to start a neighborhood watch," he declared, puffing out his chest. "We can't let criminals run rampant in our town." Across town, the atmosphere was starkly different. In the police station, Officer Daniels had just finished reviewing the initial reports. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about Harold's account. As he made his way to the surveillance room, he found himself reflecting on the discrepancies in the story. He could already sense the growing tension surrounding the case. When he reached the surveillance room, he switched on the monitors and began searching for the footage from the pharmacy's cameras. He felt a sense of urgency. Justice needed to be served, and he was determined to get to the bottom of what really happened. As he clicked through the footage, he felt his heart race. There it was, the scene that had played out just hours before. He watched as Marcus entered the pharmacy, greeted Harold, and waited patiently for his prescription. Then, without warning, Harold's voice boomed over the video, accusing Marcus of theft. The expressions on the faces of the customers were clear. Shock and confusion reigned as they looked from Harold to Marcus. Daniels leaned closer to the screen, watching as Marcus protested, his hands raised in disbelief. "This isn't right," he murmured to himself. "It's obvious he didn't do anything wrong." But as the footage continued, Daniels felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew that showing this to Harold would be a challenge. The pharmacist had built a reputation on his prejudices, and he was unlikely to accept the truth without a fight. With a heavy sigh, Officer Daniels made a mental note to confront Harold about the footage. The truth had to come to light, and he would ensure that justice was served for Marcus. Back at the diner, Harold was still reveling in his own self-importance. "I'm telling you, I've never felt prouder," he said, finishing his coffee with a flourish. "This town needs more people like me. People willing to take a stand." His friends cheered, their voices mingling with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation around them. But as they continued to celebrate the pharmacist's supposed heroism, they failed to notice the storm brewing outside. A growing wave of discontent that would soon crash over Harold, exposing his lies for all to see. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in the police station, the weight of his situation still heavy on his shoulders, but a flicker of hope ignited within him. With Officer Daniels on his side and the possibility of security footage to vindicate him, he felt a sense of purpose beginning to take root. This wouldn't be the end of his story. It was only the beginning, and he knew he had to fight back against the injustice that had been thrust upon him. Determined to clear his name, Marcus Johnson sat across from Sarah in her cramped kitchen, the faded yellow wallpaper peeling in the corners, a testament to years of neglect. The lingering scent of burnt toast filled the air, an unintentional reminder of the morning's chaos. Sarah was focused, scribbling notes on a notepad while Marcus paced back and forth. "We need to act quickly, Marcus," she said, her voice steady but edged with urgency. "Harold thinks he can just get away with this. We can't let him." Marcus nodded, feeling a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "I just can't believe this is happening. I mean, I've lived in this town my whole life. How can someone like him just accuse you of theft?" Sarah interjected, her eyes narrowing. "He's been doing this for years, Marcus. We need to gather more evidence. Let's talk to people who were there. Maybe someone saw something." As they left Sarah's house, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the town. It felt surreal to Marcus, who had once walked these streets with a sense of belonging. Now he felt like a ghost in his own life. They decided to head to the local diner first, a hub of conversations and gossip, where they might find witnesses willing to speak. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee and frying bacon enveloped them. The familiar clatter of dishes and low hum of chatter provided an oddly comforting backdrop. Marcus spotted a few patrons he recognized. Faces that had once greeted him with smiles now looked away, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Let's talk to Mr. Jenkins," Sarah suggested, pointing to an elderly man seated alone at the counter. He often came to the diner for breakfast and was known for his sharp memory. "Good idea," Marcus replied, his heart racing. He approached Mr. Jenkins, who looked up with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Marcus," the old man said, his voice gravelly. "What brings you here?" "Mr. Jenkins, I need to talk to you about something that happened at Thompson's pharmacy the other day," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. "Did you see what happened?" Jenkins hesitated, his eyes darting to the other customers before he leaned in closer. "I saw you were accused of stealing that woman's wallet," he admitted quietly. "But I didn't see the whole thing. Do you remember anything specific?" Sarah pressed, leaning forward eagerly. Just that Harold was being his usual self, rude and quick to judge. "It didn't sit right with me, but I didn't say anything because, well, you know how people are," he sighed, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, son. It's a tough spot to be in." Marcus felt a pang of disappointment but masked it with determination. "We need to find more people who will speak out." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. We'll keep looking." As they left the diner, the chill of the evening air hit Marcus's skin, but he felt energized. They spent the next few hours visiting various shops and speaking to anyone who might lend an ear. Most were hesitant, their fear of social repercussions evident. But Marcus and Sarah pressed on, determined to illuminate the truth. The following day, they met with Lisa, a local journalist known for her investigative reporting. Lisa was fiery and passionate, her dark curls bouncing as she animatedly spoke about the importance of justice in their community. "Harold Thompson has a history of this sort of behavior," Lisa said, her brow furrowing as she scrolled through her notes. "He's accused other black customers of theft before, and it's always been swept under the rug. Do you have any proof?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with hope. Lisa nodded, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she pulled up old articles and public records. "Here's a piece I did a few years ago about a similar incident. He accused a teenager of stealing but later recanted when the footage proved otherwise." Marcus felt a surge of vindication. "If we can prove this is a pattern, it will strengthen our case against him." "Absolutely," Lisa replied, her enthusiasm infectious. "Let's work together on this. I can help you gather more testimonies and compile a solid story." As they delved deeper into their investigation, they uncovered more disturbing accounts. It turned out Harold had a long history of prejudice and had made multiple false accusations against black patrons in the town. Each story was a painful reminder of the systemic racism that persisted in their community, and Marcus felt the weight of it pressing down on him. "Listen to this," Sarah said one afternoon, reading from a page filled with notes. "A woman named Clara told me Harold accused her son of shoplifting when he was just buying candy. She said he was terrified and embarrassed, and it took him weeks to feel comfortable going back into town." "That sounds just like what happened to me," Marcus replied, shaking his head. "It's infuriating." "We can't let this slide," Sarah said, determination lighting her eyes. "We need to gather everyone we can find who's been affected by him. The more voices we have, the stronger our case." Just as they began to feel they were making progress, Marcus received an unexpected call from Officer Daniels. "Marcus, I've been doing some digging into Harold's past," the officer said, his tone serious. "I think you should know that there's more to this than just a simple accusation." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, his heart racing. "I've come across records of complaints against Harold from several other individuals. It seems he has a pattern of behavior that can't be ignored. I'm compiling everything, but I think it's time you and your friends confront him. Confront him? Marcus echoed, unsure whether he was ready for that. Yes, I believe he's holding a gathering soon, bragging about his so-called victory against you. If you can catch him there, we might be able to expose him in front of his peers. Could be a turning point. The thought of confronting Harold sent a shiver down Marcus's spine, but he knew they were running out of time. All right, we'll be there. As they prepared for the confrontation, the weight of uncertainty loomed over them. The gathering was set for the following weekend at a local bar, a place where Harold often held court among his friends. It would be a risky move, but they felt it was their best chance to stand against the tide of prejudice that had engulfed Marcus's life. Are you ready for this? Sarah asked, her voice firm yet empathetic as they drove to the bar. I don't know, Marcus admitted, anxiety clawing at his insides. But I can't walk away from this anymore. I need to stand up for myself and for everyone else who's been hurt by him. With each passing moment, he felt the weight of his community's struggles resting on his shoulders. They were about to confront not just Harold Thompson, but the very fabric of racism that had woven its way into their lives. As they arrived, they could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses from inside. Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Together with Sarah and Lisa, he walked toward the entrance, ready to face the man who had wronged him and to fight for justice, not just for himself, but for all those who had suffered silently for far too long. The atmosphere in the small-town community center was electric with tension. The walls, adorned with posters of past events, seemed to close in as Marcus Johnson, Sarah, and Lisa entered the crowded room. Conversations hushed as they approached the makeshift stage where Harold Thompson stood, surrounded by a small group of his cronies, laughing boisterously at some inside joke. Marcus clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was their chance to confront Harold, to expose the truth. Are you ready for this? Sarah whispered, glancing at Marcus, her eyes filled with determination. Marcus nodded, his heart pounding. He could feel the anxious energy radiating from the crowd. Many of the townsfolk had known him for years, had watched him grow up, but now they looked at him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He could sense the burden of expectation resting heavily on his shoulders. As they approached the front, Harold's laughter subsided, replaced by a look of disdain when he spotted Marcus. Well, if it isn't the thief himself, he sneered, crossing his arms defiantly. The crowd murmured, a mix of disbelief and anticipation. Harold, we need to talk, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the anger boiling inside him. Talk? What's there to talk about? You've already made your bed, Harold shot back, his tone dripping with sarcasm. He turned to his friends, a smug grin replacing his previous irritation. Can you believe this guy? Accused of theft, and now he's trying to play the victim. Pathetic. Actually, we have evidence that shows you've been lying, Lisa interjected, stepping forward, her notepad clutched tightly in her hands. The crowd shifted, intrigued by her boldness. You've been caught on multiple occasions making false accusations against black customers. Harold's expression shifted from amusement to anger. You think you can just come in here and slander my name? I've been in this town longer than you've been alive. Marcus took a deep breath, squeezing Sarah's hand for support. This isn't just about you, Harold. It's about the pattern of racism you've perpetuated in this community. We have witnesses who are willing to speak up. The tension in the room thickened, the murmurs growing louder as more people began to pay attention. An elderly woman, Mrs. Johnson, who had known Marcus since he was a child, stood up. I've seen how Harold treats people who look different from him. It's disgraceful. Another voice chimed in, a middle-aged man named Tom who had frequented the pharmacy for years. I've heard him make comments that made me uncomfortable. We can't let this go on any longer. Marcus felt a surge of hope as more people began to stand, sharing their own stories of prejudice and mistreatment at Harold's hands. It was as if a dam had burst, and the voices of the community rose up in unison against the pharmacist who had long wielded power over them through fear and intimidation. Harold, now visibly rattled, tried to regain control of the situation. "This is ridiculous. You're all just taking his side because of some misguided notion of social justice. I'm a respected member of this community," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. But the crowd was no longer buying his bravado. They continued to speak out, sharing their own experiences with him, each story adding weight to the case against him. The tide had turned, and Marcus could feel the momentum shifting in their favor. "Harold," Marcus said, his voice rising above the din, "it's time to face the truth. You've wronged not just me, but countless others. I'm not the only one who deserves justice." Just as Harold opened his mouth to retort, a young woman named Jessica stepped forward, holding her phone aloft. "I have something that might change everything," she announced, her voice cutting through the noise. The crowd fell silent, eyes glued to her. "What do you mean?" Harold challenged, his bravado faltering. "I was at the pharmacy when it happened. I recorded everything on my phone," Jessica explained, her hands shaking slightly. "I thought it was outrageous how you treated Marcus. I never thought it would come to this. But I can't stand by and let you get away with it." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Jessica began to play the video. The image of the pharmacy filled the small room, and everyone watched as Harold accused Marcus of theft, his tone dripping with disdain. The video captured Harold's every word, every sneer, as well as Marcus's shocked and confused responses. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room, and Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him again. "It's not just about what happened in that moment," Jessica said as the video continued to play, "but what it reveals about the culture of fear and racism that has been allowed to thrive here." As the video ended, silence enveloped the room, broken only by the sound of murmurs as people processed what they had just witnessed. Marcus could see the looks on their faces: shock, disbelief, and a growing anger directed toward Harold. "See? That's not what it looked like. I'm innocent," Harold shouted, but his voice was no longer commanding the same attention. The crowd began to shift, turning their backs to him, their expressions a mixture of disappointment and disgust. "Harold, you can't keep pretending this didn't happen," Lisa urged, stepping closer to him, her tone firm but calm. "The truth is out now. You've lost the trust of this community." "Trust? You think you can just take it away from me?" Harold spat, his face reddening with rage. "I've done more for this town than any of you," a voice from the back called out. "You've done more to divide us than anything else." The crowd erupted into a chorus of agreement, their collective voices rising to drown Harold out. As the realization set in that his facade was crumbling, Harold's bravado faded into a desperate plea. "You don't understand. I was just doing my job. I had to protect my business." "Protect your business by racially profiling people? That's not protection. It's discrimination," Sarah shot back, her voice steady and unwavering. With every word spoken, Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders. This was not just his fight anymore. It was a collective stand against the prejudice that had lingered in their community for far too long. As the crowd rallied behind Marcus and his allies, Harold's face twisted in anger and frustration. "You'll all regret this," he hissed, his posture defensive, revealing his fear. "I'll make sure you pay for turning on me." But Marcus stood tall, no longer afraid. "No, Harold, we're taking a stand for what's right. The only one who will pay is you." When the truth prevails, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The community was no longer a silent observer, but an active participant in seeking justice. With support behind him, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were ready to fight against the injustice that had plagued their town for too long. As the confrontation reached a boiling point, the crowd began to chant Marcus's name, a powerful show of solidarity that echoed through the community center. He looked around, seeing the faces of friends, family, and allies who had come together to support him. In that moment, he knew they were ready to take back their narrative. "Together, we will not allow hate to thrive here any longer," Marcus shouted, his voice rising above the crowd. The chants grew louder, reverberating off the walls, a testament to their unified stand against prejudice. At that moment, as the chants filled the air, Marcus understood that this was not just about him. It was about everyone who had been wronged, everyone who had felt the sting of discrimination. Together, they would rise up, and together, they would reclaim their community from the grips of hatred. As the security footage went viral, the town of Maplewood erupted in outrage. Social media lit up with posts condemning Harold Thompson for his blatant racism and false accusations. Within hours, the hashtag Justice for Marcus trended, and the pharmacy's once loyal customers began to voice their anger. People shared their own stories of racial discrimination, igniting a collective fury that spread beyond the small town. "Did you see this?" Sarah exclaimed, her phone buzzing incessantly in her hand as she sat in the cafe with Marcus, who was still grappling with the fallout of the accusation. "Harold's getting destroyed online. Look at these comments." She scrolled through a barrage of posts, each more damning than the last. Marcus leaned in closer, his heart racing at the thought of vindication. "I can't believe it's actually happening," he murmured, half in disbelief. "I was sure I'd never get my name cleared. I thought everyone would just forget about me." "They can't forget about you now," Sarah replied, her eyes shining with determination. "You're a hero in this story. People are rallying behind you. You're not alone anymore." Marcus couldn't help but smile, the warmth of hope beginning to thaw the ice of despair that had settled in his chest since the incident. "It feels surreal. Just yesterday, I was being accused of theft, and now you're the voice of change," Sarah said, leaning back in her chair, her expression a mix of admiration and pride. "You should see the local news. They're covering the story like it's breaking news." "It's a big deal, Marcus." Just then, Lisa, the journalist who had been helping them gather evidence, entered the cafe, a wide grin plastered across her face. "You guys won't believe what just happened," she exclaimed, sliding into the booth with them. "What?" Marcus asked, his heart pounding in anticipation. "I just got off the phone with the local charity organization. They want to offer you a scholarship." "A scholarship?" Marcus echoed, his eyes widening. The idea seemed almost too good to be true. "But why? I mean, after everything that's happened, I don't understand." Lisa chuckled softly. "Because they believe in you, Marcus. They see the potential in you, and they want to help you pursue your dream of becoming a pharmacist. They want to invest in the kind of person who stands up for what's right." Tears welling in his eyes, Marcus struggled to process the whirlwind of emotions. "I don't know what to say. This is incredible." "Say yes," Sarah urged, her enthusiasm contagious. "This is your chance to make a difference, not just for yourself, but for everyone who has faced the same kind of injustice." As the trio continued to discuss the implications of the scholarship, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. No longer was he just a victim of circumstance. He was a catalyst for change. A few days later, the fallout from Harold's actions continued to mount. He had been suspended from his job, and the pharmacy faced mounting pressure from both the public and local authorities. It wasn't long before he received a phone call informing him of his termination. Sitting in his living room, Harold stared blankly at the wall, the weight of his decisions crashing down upon him like a tidal wave. His friends had turned their backs, and the supportive community he once took for granted now viewed him with disdain. "Harold, are you okay?" his wife, Carol, asked cautiously, stepping into the room. She had seen the news, and the worry etched on her face was palpable. "Do I look okay?" he snapped, his frustration bubbling over. "I've lost everything. My job, my reputation. All because of that man. Harold, you need to understand that what you did was wrong. You can't just accuse someone without evidence. You let your prejudice cloud your judgment," she said gently, trying to reach him. "Prejudice? I was just protecting my store," he retorted, his voice rising. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "That's the problem," Carol sighed, her gaze dropping to the floor. "You never stopped to think about what it meant for him. You only saw him as a threat." In the days that followed, Harold found himself reflecting on his actions. The outcry against him was too loud to ignore, and he could no longer convince himself that he was the hero of this story. He was the villain. Meanwhile, Marcus was busy preparing for a community event dedicated to addressing racial issues in Maplewood. The local charity had invited him to speak, and he was determined to use the platform to educate others about the impact of racism and the importance of empathy. "Marcus, you're going to be amazing," Sarah encouraged as they rehearsed his speech together in her living room. "What if I choke? What if nobody listens?" He expressed his fears, pacing back and forth. "Just speak from your heart," Sarah replied, her tone reassuring. "You're not just talking about yourself. You're talking about everyone who has faced this kind of treatment. Your voice matters." The night of the event arrived, and the community center was packed. People from all walks of life had gathered, eager to hear Marcus's story. As he stood on the stage, the lights shining brightly in his eyes, he felt a surge of nerves mixed with excitement. "Hello, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in his stomach. "Thank you for being here tonight. I know that many of you have heard about my recent experience at Thompson's Pharmacy. I stand before you not just as a victim, but as a person who believes that we can change the narrative." As he spoke, he shared the pain of humiliation, but more importantly, he spoke of hope. Hope for a future where people would be judged by their character and actions, not the color of their skin. The audience listened intently, many nodding along as he recounted the support he had received from friends and strangers alike. He highlighted the importance of community and the need to stand together against prejudice. "Together, we can create a world where everyone feels safe and valued. We must challenge our biases and speak out against injustice, no matter where we see it," he concluded, his voice resonating with passion. The room erupted in applause, a wave of solidarity washing over him. In that moment, Marcus realized that he had transformed from a victim to a voice of change, and it felt exhilarating. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Officer Daniels standing there, a nervous smile on his face. "Marcus, can we talk?" he asked, his tone tentative. "Sure," Marcus replied, curious. "What's on your mind?" "I wanted to say that I'm proud of you," Officer Daniels said, his eyes sincere. "What you did tonight took a lot of courage. I wish I had been there for you sooner." "Thanks, officer. It means a lot coming from you," Marcus said, feeling a strange sense of familiarity. "I have to confess something," Daniels added, his expression serious. "I'm your father." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Marcus blinked in disbelief. "What? My father?" "Yes," Officer Daniels said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been looking for you for years. I had no idea you were the one involved in that incident until I saw the footage. I wanted to reach out sooner, but I didn't know how." Slowly, realization washed over Marcus, and the pieces began to fit together. "You've been looking for me? All this time?" "I never stopped," Daniels replied, his voice soft. "I was determined to find you, to be there for you. I'm so sorry for everything you've gone through." Overwhelmed by a rush of emotions, Marcus stepped forward, embracing his father for the first time. "I can't believe it," he murmured, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'm here now," Daniels whispered, holding him tightly, "and I'll always be here for you. Together, we can change the system from within." In that moment, Marcus felt a profound sense of healing. He was no longer just a victim of prejudice. He was armed with the love of a father who had been searching for him, ready to take on the world and make it a better place for everyone. The journey from victim to victor had come full circle, and together, they would fight for justice, love, and understanding. If you like the content, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and share it with your friends. Your comment is essential for the growth of the channel. And look at this video that appears on the screen. See you soon.